You're watching Lucia's Vegan Lifestyle. Welcome to Lucia's Vegan Lifestyle, your show for compassionate living without sacrifice. I'm your host, Lucia Grillo. It's Earth Month. On this episode of Lucia's Vegan Lifestyle, I am joined by guests Barry Alexander Brown and Valter Longo, whose new documentary, narrated by actor and socio-environmental activist Edward Norton, shows us how to live longer. We'll also talk about Barry's just-released book, his first novel, Wind, part of a trilogy, a perfect read for Earth Month. Earth Month is a perfect time to reflect on caring for our planet and ourselves. My guests on this episode are here to help us do just that, via film and literature. Joining me are Barry Alexander Brown and Dr. Valter Longo. Barry is an Oscar-nominated filmmaker, editor, and writer from Montgomery, Alabama. Known for his longtime collaboration with Spike Lee, he has edited some of Spike's most renowned films, including Do the Right Thing, Malcolm X, He Got Game, 25th Hour, Inside Man, and Black Klansman, for which he received an Oscar nomination, and Summer of Sam, which is how we met, and numerous other acclaimed films, including most recently, Highest to Lowest. Barry's documentary, The War at Home, was also Oscar nominated. He is debuting his first novel, Wind, part of a trilogy, about which we will talk later in this episode, and is also here to tell us about his latest documentary, Fasting and the Longevity Revolution, featuring Dr. Valter Longo. Valter is an Italian-American biogerontologist and cell biologist. He is a professor of biogerontology and the director of the Longevity Institute at USC Davis School of Gerontology in Los Angeles. An internationally recognized expert in longevity and age-related diseases, his research focuses on nutrition, genetics, and aging, conducted across institutions in the US, Italy, and Europe. Named one of the 50 most influential people in healthcare by Time magazine, he is the founder of the nonprofit organizations Create Cures Foundation in the US and the Valter Longo Foundation in Italy. Barry and Valter, welcome and thank you for joining me on Lucia's Vegan Lifestyle.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'm very excited to talk about this documentary. And the practical application of your findings, Valter. First, I must say that I am very jealous. One, that you went to Calabria without me, but I'm so happy you went. And
because you know, Lucia's family's from Calabria too.
Yeah, great. Where from?
They're from a town called Francavilla-Ngitola, which is in the province of Vibo Valentia.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yeah, and that I make my films there, which Barry was instrumental in encouraging me to do. We talk about Calabria a lot on this show, which is why I was so excited about the documentary, because a lot of the things that you've included, that you're telling us about in the doc, is and your findings are so exactly my family. We have longevity in my family as well. The eldest that I know of was my great aunt that was still in Calabria. She died a couple of years ago at 104. So we have the longevity there as well. So this is one of the reasons why I'm so excited to talk about all of this. What was the impetus for making the documentary?
Valter's book. They had actually begun to shoot interviews before I came on as the director, and I met Valter and Chiara Tilesi in LA, and I read the book, and quite frankly, I was knocked out by the book. It just opened an enormous door for me. When I was growing up, I grew up in the Deep South. And when I grew up eating, not a healthy diet. I mean, the Southern diet might be something a lot of people liked. I certainly liked it growing up. But, everything was fried. If it's not fried, it's overcooked, and and let's throw some pork in there. That'll make it taste better, And since working on the film, everything changed, and everything changed for me. I mean, one of the amazing things is that my wife, Varen, really changed. She just did a 180 where I am delving into this, and she learned how to cook all this stuff.
She's an amazing
She
cook,
is
too.
amazing. You've tasted her food.
Yeah.
Amazing. And everybody that comes to the house for dinner, no matter who you are and what you're used to eating, everybody says, wow, this is amazing. You know, and we have a house in France in Provence where, you know, so much of the cuisine, like in Calabria, you know, is based upon fresh vegetables. And you have incredible stuff.
I love.
Yeah.
I've been to Provence. I've been going to France since I was a teen, and some of it was very similar to Calabria.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I was walking from the beach, and there was a cactus laden with what we call fichi d'India, Indian figs, prickly pears.
Oh, prickly pears, yeah.
And nobody was. I mean, you can't pick them because they have the needles. You have to
Right.
pick them in a certain way. But oh my God, this is fruit that anybody can just eat walking by.
Right. Yeah, like us, fig trees and all kinds of things.
Amazing.
You know?
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. And I'm glad that your beautiful wife influenced you in this way as well.
Well, to me, it was just, I know that people like shorter and shorter content, right? So this was an incredible opportunity to tell what's in a 250-page book in an hour and 40 minutes, right? So and you know, and make it, you know, not as entertaining as some other documentaries are, but I think entertaining and you know, informative and educational. So I think that this can make a big difference in somebody's life, and you know, maybe 20, 30 years of life expectancy difference, right? So it's just remarkable how changing what you do can do to your life, not just how long you live, but also you know, how are you going to live tomorrow, right? So I think people always think, well, you know, it's 30 years on the road, who cares? But if you change, this is going to change your day tomorrow. And you know, and not just physically, also psychologically, right? So I think that's what the documentary is about. And then and Barry really pushed that part, and Chiara pushed that part. It's also the part about you know, the business, right? All the businesses that are not really there to make us healthy, but businesses that are profiting from all of us being unhealthy and just buying lots of things that we don't need, and then end up in with very expensive drugs and surgeries and et cetera, et cetera. So that part I think is also very important, and the movie starts with that, which was maybe not as anticipated.
I wanted to ask you, you know, GLP-1s are trending, and, you know, all of the Hollywood actresses and actors are on the red carpet, and they're largely being criticized. You know, if I scroll through social media and see, like, you know, the Oscars just happened, so if I go and see what someone's wearing and what people are saying about it, largely people are critical of this extreme thinness from GLP-1s, but people don't want to be obese, right? They want to be healthy and they want to look good. I read briefly about GLP-1s and that we can actually, you tell me correctly, because this is your expertise, we can get them from our diet, or the body can generate them from our diet. Is this true?
Yes. So the body can have high levels of GLP-1.
Okay.
And in fact, it turns out that if you take GLP-1, eventually the body may not make as much, right? And so now you created a problem because you're not as effective in making your own, right? And this is why people that are on GLP-1, it's really an illusion, right? Because the pharmaceutical companies will say, if you stop GLP-1, now they're admitting it. Say, if you stop GLP-1, you're going to regain the weight, right? And now we know from studies. Now most people stop GLP-1. So then we now know also that when you stop GLP-1, you're going to regain weight more quickly than if you had lost it by dietary or lifestyle intervention, right? So that pretty much tells you that every doctor in the world should say, don't do it, right? Don't do GLP-1. It's just going to put you in and another thing, when you regain the weight, it's mostly going to be fat. You're going to lose fat and muscle, but you're going to only regain fat, right? So you're basically condemned as soon as you start regaining the weight and then having more fat to lean body mass ratio than before, including then the risk of psychological risks and other risks that come with the GLP-1, right? Like, potential blindness, et cetera, et cetera.
Valter and Chiara both have a bigger worldview than this is just about diet. This diet, the diets that we have exist because of the systems that we live in.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct?
Yeah, and I think, now if you look at 50 years in the US or Europe, and almost everybody now is overweight, obese, and sick, right? This is crazy, right? There's a new, we didn't include it, but I wish we had. There's a new study by Harvard showing that less than 10% of people will get to age 70 or 75 healthy, right? So almost everybody has got 1, 2, 3, 4 chronic conditions, and which make life not that fun to live, right?
Exactly.
So I think it's truly interesting, right? That we're not putting much more effort into this. We put a lot of money, but we're not getting a lot of results with all the money. And that's what we also say in the documentary. There's a ton of money spent in the U.S. for healthcare, and the results are just terrible.
So bad.
And the thing about it, I think that Valter actually touched upon this. His books and this documentary isn't about just living longer. It's about living healthier.
Right.
And you live
exactly.
healthier, your quality of life simply goes up.
Yeah, it's funny. I know I bring up the personal. The show is based on my life. That's why I love having you guys. So I talked to my dad, who's 86 now. Right, my parents raised me on their diet that they had in Calabria. They each came here when they were 16, and they continued eating the same way. And my father's a chef. My mom's an impeccable cook. But I talk to my father every day, and every day we talk about what we've eaten and our health and our well-being and what we need to do that day, or what we've been doing to maintain our health. And this is something that, a lot of people think is kind of new agey, newfangled thing. And sometimes I kind of giggle because, my father is, I adore this man. He's, he had almost zero formal education in Calabria, right? He's been working. You had the old man, one of the centenarians talking about zappare la terra, working the land.
Yeah.
My father was zappando la terra since he was a child, and that's all he knew until he came here. And these ways of doing now is kind of like, it's almost a luxury, it seems, to be able to eat and live this way, right? We have on one hand, it's like, it's kind of with what people say is a bougie way of living, to be able to live on fruits and veggies and healthy foods. But on the other hand, it's actually the basics which people can do, even if they're on a very strict financial budget.
It's how our ancestors lived.
Right.
Yeah, but I think Barry did a great job sort of capturing this world that doesn't exist anymore, right? And maybe I also like when people in Sardinia and Calabria were saying, yeah, we used to have this, and it's gone, right? And that's true, right? Even for Sardinia and Calabria, it's gone, right? So that world, that's our perfect world that you combine food but also happiness. It's mostly gone, right? And so now in Calabria is one of the worst areas in Europe for health. Sardinia is probably close by, and people are eating a lot of meat, a lot of processed meat, and so it's really I think important. So we're working with the government in southern Italy and hoping to bring back out this pride in the way it used to be, right? So you have Pepiniello saying, we eat poison, right?
Adesso tutto inquinato, tutto avvelenato. La gente si avvelena, non capisce che si prende il veleno.
And Yeah, so he's talking about times where they didn't have bakeries,
And he said
but there
he
was,
said he ate poorly because they were
yeah,
poor.
yeah.
A cucina,
They
the
had
cucina
almost nothing,
povera.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's gone, right? And how do we bring that all of that back? I think it's just with you know, lots of different components and pride, right? So I always talk about and with Barry, we also went to Loma Linda. And Loma Linda's, I think, is a great example of modern pride, right? So where the Seventh-day Adventists, they started becoming healthy because they belong to a particular religion, and then they started to take pride in that, and everybody's saying, you know, we're some of the healthiest in the world, and so now it spreads, right? It's like a viral, you know, a viral infection, and yeah, so I think it'd be nice if we could show that we could sort of bring that virus back to southern Italy.
Yeah.
Then the rest of the world can maybe, you know, say, hey, you used to be very long lived, and then it was gone,
Right.
and now we brought it back, you know. Oh yeah.
But
So I
Genoa
think
is a
that
little bit different now, right?
Genova is a little bit different just because you know, it always had such a good cuisine based on vegetable and fish that people said, you know what, I'm not gonna change. You know, I don't need a lot of processed meats to be happy, right? So yeah, so Genova has got this peculiar combination of you know, like panissa or you know farinata, right? Garbanzo beans that are especially farinata because panissa is fried, but farinata is garbanzo beans that are baked, right? So and that's one of the biggest dishes still in Italy. If you look at the data from millions of people, whether it's Asia, Europe, United States, you know, vegetables consistently come up number one. You know, and let's say legumes and vegetables, right? So they come up number one in the most associated with lifespan extension or increased life expectancy. So then you know, you have the whole grain cereal. And then you have sometimes you see the fruit and sometimes you don't, right? So fruit is probably, it can be good and bad, right? If you eat the right amount, it's good. If you eat too much, you can become obese on fruit, especially high fructose fruit. So yeah, so I think that it's pretty clear that you know, a variety of vegetables, especially if you pay attention to seasonality, which we're losing, and yeah, so that's probably going to be very very healthy. And you know, the Harvard study that I mentioned earlier show a 2.2 fold increase in making it to 70 or 75 healthy if you had the type of diet that I just described, like mostly vegan, you know, lots of vegetable, nuts and walnuts, and I mean hazelnuts and walnuts and almonds, and you know, whole grain products. That's about 2.2 fold higher chance of making it to 70 healthy, right? Which is really remarkable. And so absolutely, each one of those ingredients probably does something different, both nourishment, but also not contributing to aging acceleration, right? So it's a dual effect. It nourishes you, but it's not pushing this, you know, pro-aging, meaning these genes that make you age quicker.
Okay. And of course, the documentary is about fasting. So I love this this idea of I don't know if I'm wording it right, but starving without depriving the body of nutrients.
Well, yeah, it really comes down to something that Dr. Longo developed, which is the 5-day fasting mimicking diet, which now I do. I do it like 3 times a year. Sometimes my wife does it 4.
Ooh.
5 maybe, which I think probably Valter says that's a little too much. But you know, it's you know, the first time you do it, it's challenging, but quite frankly, you get quite used to it pretty quickly. And by the time you do it several times, actually you kind of look forward to that one feeling of feeling empty.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think it's a challenge. It's a little bit of a challenge, but I think that, I always say, can you imagine if we had a pill for jogging, right? So you don't have to go jogging. Just take a pill. Take the jogging pill, take the stairs pill, right? Yeah, I do have to take. So the illusion is that it's better, it's easier, right? Why do I have to take the stairs when I have an elevator, or an escalator?
Yeah.
But in fact, maybe there's something about those stairs that,
Yes.
that it's important for you,
Yeah.
right? To just be a person, right? To say, hey, I still use muscle. I still go up the stairs like people use. I mean, think about it, right? For 100,000 years, humans have always done everything, physically, right?
Exactly.
There's no elevator or
Yeah.
escalator, right? So only in that's what the doctor from Loma Linda says in the documentary, right?
If you look at the evolution of mankind, we were not in periods of feast like we are now. We were in periods of feast and famine.
If you think of the span of human history like a football field, so here's 100 yards, and the Industrial Revolution happened in the last quarter inch. So we actually have a biology that's made to starve over and over and over again. And the individuals back in those ancient times that were actually insulin resistant were the survivors, because when you're insulin resistant, you can't burn fat as fast as you can when you have low insulin. So something that was preserving life suddenly in the last quarter inch is just crazy horrible.
Only in the last quarter inch have we messed everything up, right? And so I think that fasting is also part of that, right? That take the stairs, right? I mean, of course, it does a lot of incredible things at the cellular level, at the molecular level. But I think just even if it didn't, just the fact that you now say, I can go 5 days without having to eat lots of things that are full of whatever, starches and sugars and fried fat, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, and of course, particularly good for those that have a terrible diet. A vegan is not going to be as affected as the average American or European, which is now loaded with, 4,000 kilocalories per day, lots of meat, lots of, ultra processed food. That's a reality for most people.
Wow.
And now imagine for them, you take this break, with this vegan break for 5 days. So that makes a big difference. Yeah.
Once people watch the documentary, what are the next steps for them?
Get Valter's books.
Okay.
I mean, this is you can only get so much in 90 minutes. And Valter's books really lay it out in a very clear way.
Perfect. I've added
And
them.
by the way, so it doesn't sound like infomercial. I don't make a penny out of the book, so all of it, in fact, it is owned by the foundation. And the foundation really is the other major part, which is the Create Cures Foundation. Is in Los Angeles, but it follows people all over the United States. And and so the idea, like most doctors are not trained on lifestyle, on nutrition, on exercise. So the foundation has the job of making sure that the person is followed, and whether they can afford it or not, and it becomes healthier. It's a slow process, but most people eventually improve a lot, and they can reduce drug use, and they can be healthier, and they can stay healthier, right? So that's the idea of the book and the documentary, is to generate awareness, but also to send people to the foundation so that they can be followed by professionals that actually know how to make it work.
Amazing. And people can find out about all of this and watch the documentary at fastingandthelongevityrevolution.com.
Yeah, .com.
And I've added Dr. Valter Longo's books to the Lucia's Vegan Lifestyle Amazon storefront for viewers who follow there that can purchase them easily. Dr. Longo, thank you so much. Larry, the documentary is about diet and I think people's relation to the earth as well, right? With a lot of the foods that the interviewees, the centenarians have eaten, they're all natural foods, right? One of your guests, Marion Nestle, mentions briefly our need for consciousness about the effects of animal agriculture on the planet.
You know, every university has programs in food where they're teaching people about how food can be used to make populations healthier, to prevent undernutrition, to prevent chronic disease, and to prevent climate change. Increasing recognition of the role of agriculture in causing roughly 20 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, and why we have to change our agricultural system.
And I think this being Earth Day, it's a good segue into your book, which it's very enigmatic. You've been very enigmatic about it, so I hope you'll reveal something more. I'm really, really intrigued. The topic is very close to nature.
You know, the main character, A on the Leaf, has grown up on an island, which they call the peninsula, because when his people were cut off from the world 1,000 years before, that's what it was.
Okay.
You know, and at that time, they were a warrior nation, vicious people. And then they had to be completely self-reliant. This is a place that flooded, so they had to take to the trees and build their city in the trees. And one of the things that they didn't know how to do almost anything, so they didn't even know how to build stuff. So they had to figure everything out. And one of the things they did was use vines as a living way to construct their houses, their bridges, you know. And, you know, 1,000 years of living with this city in the trees has changed them. There's even a thing that happens in the book where there is a ceremony that happens at 101 moons where a child then falls through an opening in the trees. And it changes them. It creates a connection to the trees. And the first one who did it was an accident. And then when they saw her changed, you know, they thought, well, everybody has to do this. She's fallen through this great distance. She has lived. And she has an understanding that none of us have. So they've even gotten to the point where they have understood that the trees have a language. And actually, the language is called wind, which is what this book is called. And the Tor'ocs, this was the name of the people, they learned this language, wind. And so they can actually communicate. For them, trees are a sentient, intelligent being. They aren't just a thing to chop down and chop up and disregard or burn, you know. So they have created really a symbiotic relationship with the forest that is not so easy to do unless you're a people that are get cut off and you have to discover everything now, you know, and they discovered some amazing elements, you know.
And you have a whole language that you've written.
Well, you know, yeah. I mean, there was another thing that they didn't have a written language, you know, because they were, you know, they were warriors. That's all they needed to do was conquer and dominate.
And conquer, dominate, and then,
you know, and learn how to fight and to kill, you know, and you know, once they sucked everything out of a land and a people, they moved on, right? So, and they made everybody do everything for them, you know.
Is this an allegory for the world now? What inspired you? I know who inspired you, right?
Well,
your beautiful wife inspired you to
yes,
write
I
this.
wrote it. We were apart a lot during this, making the writing of this book, and I wrote a lot of it and sent her chapters as I wrote it. I'm not so sure where the inspiration came. It came, and then quite frankly, I just found myself in this world, and witnessed it and experienced it, and then wrote it. So I don't know if it's an allegory. I mean, certainly there's probably things you can see in this story and in this in the way he actually, Aeon the Leaf is the main character, how he treats the world, because they bring him, they ask for him to come back into the world, because the world, the outworld as they call it, but it's called Amira, they need him. And he's the last of the blood of this vicious and legendary, infamous war chief called Suman. And that's who they need.
You're not going to tell us why?
Well, no. I mean, he doesn't even,
this.
most of this book, most of this book, he doesn't know why. And he's willing to go along. But in the midst of all of this, you know, he has a very different take on almost everything. You know, at some point, you know, he lives on an island where you take care of each other, right?
That's
you know,
the kind of world we
there's
want.
There's no, and then at some point, one of the people who are his guides across this land is trying to explain to him about what they called ashash, or money. And he's like, no, wait a second. Oh, you're telling me this little piece of metal, what is it worth? And he goes, you know, and what can I get for this? And he goes, well, you know, I know I'm very naive about the world, but I'm not falling for that.
Oh, I like that. I think we need him here.
And so at some point, he ends up with a great deal of it, right? Yeah. And somebody says, do you know what that's worth? And he said, I think I'm the only one here who does. You know? So yeah, I mean, to some extent, I mean, we see this world through his eyes, and for me, it's a nice, fresh point of view, and people are constantly surprised by him, because a Tor'oc in this world is a mythical creature. You know, it's what children tell. I mean, it's what adults tell their children. They say, you know, if you don't behave, a Tor'oc's going to get you. They live in the shadows, right? So little kids are petrified, and by the time you're 8 or 9, you think, Tor'ocs don't exist. Right. And then all of a sudden, there's one walking around, and they recognize this is a Tor'oc.
I love the fact that the trees save them. I was a literal tree hugger as a child. Yeah. I love being in nature. But I think this happens to probably all humans. There are probably humans who do not like to be immersed in nature, but it is very good for the human being to be, right,
yeah, sure,
in concert with nature. So I love this fact that your people are saved by the trees. I mean, this can also be something. Well, we need to save the trees right now, right? This has been a slogan for decades.
Because the trees will save us as well. But you know, there's a lot of things that you know. Once I wrote the book, and now it's coming out into the world, and we wanted to create other elements to it, like this thing, which is part of the special editions. You know, and that was like, I wanted to do something like this. You know, but what is this material made out of? And quite frankly, I was having a hard time with the idea it was going to be leather. So this is vegan leather, you know, it is. And also we have this scarf, and I wanted a silk scarf. And then once I started going into looking at what that meant to have a silk scarf, and where are they made, and even finally how are they made, from just looking at silk, there was something called peace silk. And it said, we do not kill the worm. And I thought, you got to kill the silkworm to make silk? Wait a second, what? And I went into looking into that. I thought, wow, wait a second, really? And so once I got into looking at peace silk, then it led me to other things, like silk is made out of all other things, right? You know, it's made out of bamboo. And then I found a place in Ahmedabad, India, and they make their silk out of banana fiber, which I think is bits and pieces of the tree that are discarded once they take the bananas.
Oh God, so right? No waste.
And so we have this beautiful scarf.
So when you make the movie of this, you can have all the wardrobe made.
Yes,
You can have a
absolutely.
vegan set.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you're right, you know, like in Fasting and the Longevity Revolution, we tried to touch on, I mean, there's a lot to touch on. And we didn't want to make this unwieldy documentary. It was like, where are we now? So you're right, you know, we did have to touch on for a moment, you know, one of the great problems with eating meat is how much it damages not only, you know, our stratosphere, but how much it damages such things as the Amazon, which we need. The Amazon, we need the lungs of the world. And now we see that, you know, it is disappearing. And for what? And for cattle farms.
Yeah, yeah.
So and what are you going to benefit from it?
Exactly.
You know, it was is all that beef going to make you healthier? It's
I don't even
certainly
call
not.
people, this is why I like the idea of your book as well, and I can't wait to delve into it, because we do need a society in which we are taking care of each other.
As well as, let's have some planning here, people. You know, let's really look at the problems. Let's look at really, truly what's happening.
Yeah.
And, you know, if we're destroying forest so that we can eat more beef, and wait a second, you know, you got to honestly look at what that means.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you are going to destroy the planet.
Yeah.
And for what reason?
Yeah.
You know?
People need to read this book. You're going to be at BookCon, April.
BookCon on April 18th and 19th.
Okay.
And before that, we are having a Kickstarter campaign starting April 14th.
Which people can get to via the code on the screen, and they can go to the website to find out more. And I've also added the book to the show's Amazon storefront.
Great.
So viewers who are following there can also buy it there.
But yeah, we're promoting the whole trilogy.
Okay.
Not just book one, but book 2 and 3. And book 2 comes out this fall, and book 3 the fall after.
Amazing. And among other activities at BookCon, people might have the chance to win one of these vegan silk scarves.
Oh yeah, you have to go through something called the Riddle of the Trees, which is using the Tor'oc alphabet. And yeah, and it's all going from tree to tree to tree to, you know, because trees are such an important part of this story.
Right. Barry, thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Lucia's Vegan Lifestyle is your TV show, Amazon Live and storefront, and platform for vegan living. Take advantage of all LVL offers to help you live your best vegan life, whether luxury or on a budget. I've lived it all, and that's why Lucia's Vegan Lifestyle is anyone's and everyone's vegan lifestyle. For more on vegan living, subscribe to the Lucia's Vegan Lifestyle YouTube channel, follow across social media, and follow and shop on Amazon Live and the curated LVL Amazon storefront. Purchase some of the products right now directly via the links in this episode description below. I hope you found this episode insightful and helpful. If you did, be sure to like and comment below and share the link with others. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Lucia's Vegan Lifestyle, your show for compassionate living without sacrifice. I'm Lucia, I'm vegan, and this is my lifestyle.